What's up, boys and girls? Welcome to this video of the pink car. So this is a pink R33 GTST and it's here for a little bit of fun. So we'll get into what we're going to do with this thing. Alright guys, so as you can see here, we've got ourselves an RB25DET. Now the guy who owns this, because his name's Angus, sorry Angus, I don't quite know how to pronounce your last name, so I'm not going to say it online. But anyway, he wants to build this car as somewhat of a street car that he can sort of take to Archie and, you know, bash around and have some fun. So he tells me that the motor's been rebuilt quite recently, maybe 20,000 Ks ago. He's put forged rods in it. He's left the stock pistons in it for now. He did the external head drain, and they've done the crank collar on the oil pump drive. So some key important things to make this RB pretty reliable, which says to me this thing should be fine for a fair bit of power. He obviously put head studs and a decent head gasket in it as well. Being that the cast pistons are very brittle and this is going to be tuned on pump fuel, we've got to be really careful with knock, because when you rattle these things, those pistons, they do go. So to tune this thing, I'd say it's going to be good for some pretty big, decent power. The motor's going to be fine. Just got to keep it fairly rich and pretty conservative with timing. So as well as the rebuild, we've got here our Plasma Man top half of the plenum, which is a pretty expensive freaking part. I've never actually personally done one of these Plasma Man top halves, but I have been told they yield very good results, as well as retaining that extra length for the runners gives you that good sort of punchiness down low as well. So it's a pretty good setup for what he wants to do with it. For something like Archie, this car should be a real animal. And interestingly, on this car, we've actually got the same turbo that we have on the Zach Baldy Nugget. So we've got the same sort of just China cheap turbo for now, albeit this one is not a stock R33 dump pipe. This has actually got a proper dump pipe, so it'll be very interesting to see how we go with boost on this setup, considering that we've actually got a dump pipe that should flow. So this will tell the story whether our problem with back pressure is in the actual turbo and housing, or whether it's in the dump pipe, which is what I believe. So that pretty much rounds out the setup. This is the motor. So as you can see, nice pink car. We've got some white SSRs. I really actually do like this color scheme quite a lot. It's very almost Yoshio factory-ish, but it's got a bit more metallic in the pink. It's a bit deeper. I actually really like it. It's really cool. So pretty cool car, I reckon. So at the back end of the car here, we've actually got an electric power steering setup, which is very interesting because this is a very similar setup to what me and Rex plan on doing in our current builds for our drift cars that we're currently building. So this is a pretty cool setup. I've actually learned a lot even just by looking at this setup and talking to Angus about it, about the pressure relief and everything else that has to go into this setup to make it sort of work properly. So that's really cool, that's awesome. He's got already upgraded the fuel pump wiring, which as we know is a definite plus. He's got a 300 litre per hour fuel pump or something similar like that. You know, something decent in this thing. So plenty of fuel for what we want to do. And that pretty much is the rear end of the car. We've got a nice strut brace at the back here. It should be a pretty fun car. We've got coilovers. I'm not sure what the brand are. As you can see in the front end, it's got a little bit of camber in there. It looks like it's pretty well set up, so this car should be awesome. Stepping inside here, you can see we've got quite a simple setup, which I am a very big fan of in cars. I do love my very streamlined sort of interiors. There's nothing I hate more than getting in a car and having a million gauges in your face. Not a fan. So really enjoy this nice simple interior. We've got the addition of a cup holder over here, which, as we all know, in Japanese cars from the 90s is a very, very important addition. So just driving this car around, I can tell the diff is pretty tight, whatever it is. I don't know whether it's a two-way or a weldy or what it is, but it's definitely chirpy. So we'll see how that goes. We've got ourselves an Innovate AFR gauge here, which should have the output, which I should be able to wire in for our tune, and just very, very simple otherwise. So currently on the stock ECU, she's got just a boost T in the engine bay, which, as you guys know, not a big fan of, but it gets the job done. Angus and I have talked about it. For now, we're going to leave the boost T in. This turbo setup is only meant to be sort of a bit of an interim. Eventually he's going to go to a high mount and a bigger turbo, and at that point we're going to look at actually putting a Mac valve in it and having some ECU controlled boost. So currently got the stock ECU in it, right? But this is what it's here for. We've got ourselves this beautiful, lovely Adaptronic plug and play modular ECU. Now, I firmly believe that these are one of the best value for money plug-in ECUs on the market for these things. You know, when you compare them to the cost of, say, a Haltech or a Link, as good as they are, these things are very, very, very capable ECUs. Particularly its modular range. If you're the sort of person that's into PCs or, you know, computers and that, if you're into your software and hardware and that, Adaptronic actually makes these in such a way that you can modularly upgrade them. They have upgrade slots. You can put X, you know, whatever you would like to upgrade or expand into your ECU. They're very, very cool things. And as you can see from factory, not only do they come with a map sensor, they also come with a secondary port for EMAP. So you can actually log your exhaust map pressure, or your exhaust pressure, which I'm going to have a look. If there's somewhere I can easily drill and tap a fitting onto, I'm thinking about doing that for this car. For the sake of having the small turbo, I would actually be somewhat interested in finding out what sort of back pressure we're actually running at what sort of boost levels. We've also got a set of injectors here. Can't remember exactly what he said they were. I'm going to have to message him and ask him again, because it's already left my mind. But some decent side feeds, which apparently have been flow tested and cleaned and are ready to go in. So we've got our ECU, we've got our side feeds, we've got our boost T. So we're going to have a little bit of boost into this thing and pretty much see what happens and where we get to. At this stage, I still believe with this setup, much like Zach's, we're going to run out of turbine before anything else. That's going to be the first thing to hang us up. So that's what we're up to. And have a look at this, guys. Angus has actually already ran the map line through the firewall and just left it in situ, ready for me to go. How good is that? Thank you so much, Angus. So anyway, guys, much like everything else that comes here, that drives here, we'll get it on the dyno and we'll do a baseline run with the stock ECU, how it's set up currently, get an idea of what it's making, what it's doing right now, and then we'll get into fitting our new injectors, getting a new ECU in there, setting up a few things, and we'll get this thing tuned on this Adaptronic and see what we can get out of it. So you can see there what I mean. It's the same turbo we put on Zach's, all the same. We've just got an actual decent dump pipe, which is going to probably flow much better than a stock one. Alrighty, so I've just done a quick check over the car before we do our baseline run. Found a little fuel leak on the rail, so I've tightened that up and everything else seems to be fine. I'm not sure what sort of boost it's running on this stock sort of setup or what the go is, so we'll just do some steady state for now while I clean out the pipe, make sure there's not any gross water in there that's going to wreck our O2 sensor. Keep an eye on it, set our tacho, and then I'll whack the O2 it and we'll get a baseline. Very excited. I really enjoy Adaptronic software. I really like tuning with Adaptronic, so very excited to have this Adaptronic in. We've actually got a workshop full of R33s again. We've got another one here which we're doing for another customer, so I'm actually planning on putting an Adaptronic in this one too, so yeah, very cool. got a pink label AFM on it, and we know they sort of start to run out of resolution around there. So I'm wondering if it's starting to run out of resolution, the ECU is losing track of what it's doing, and I wonder if here it's just dying and falling into heaps of bad timing or whatever else may be happening. So what I've decided I'm going to do, I'm going to just bypass the boost T for now, see if I can just get this thing on wastegate pressure. I'm hoping that wastegate pressure is only sort of maybe 10 pound or so. We'll see what happens. Alright, so as you can see, we've got no boost T in there anymore, just straight through to the wastegate. So now let's see what this thing, how it behaves. These last 3 runs were done just on wastegate pressure, which as you can see is still, you know, sort of hitting 8 and then it's creeping. So we definitely have a boost control issue, a wastegate issue here, which is then not good. And as you can see, we're sort of getting to about 15 where it just stops and levels out, which would then tell me that's where this is sort of running out of turbine housing. Because you know, you can see gate opens, creeps up real hard, and then it sort of just levels out, and that's sort of just where it stops. You can see it gets real rich. It appears that's where this thing's still, just like Zach's, is running out of flow at around exactly the same point. So we've got a few issues here to look into. I'm gonna have a chat to Angus first, see what he reckons, what he wants to do, because you know, I can still go ahead and fit the ECU and sort of do the tune, but it's almost like a useless exercise, because at the end of the day you're still going to have to sort these issues out, and once they're sorted it's going to have to come back. So this is always one of those things where communicate with the customer, try and get it to happen in the best possible way or steps to get there as we can, without, you know, incurring the customer too much cost. It's one of those things where we can definitely sort it out for him, but you know, generally most of these cars, the customers do a lot of the work themselves. Most of them are pretty savvy, and that's how they save money and they can have fun. So we always give them the option of whether they want us to do it or whether they want to come and get the car and go and sort it out themselves. So because if you remember when we did Zach's, we also ported the crap out of the internal gate on that turbo. Like, we ported it out massively compared to stock. So I talked to Angus when he dropped the car off. He did say that he did port the wastegate, like the internal wastegate a little bit, but not as much as we ported Zach's. So you can see they sort of follow the same curve. Obviously Zach's comes on a bit harder because we had the Mac valve in it, so that does help a lot with that, getting it on boost there onto gate. So you can see here on wastegate pressure at 9, you can see where the wastegate it opens. So you can see where, plain as day, the thing opens, that's fine, but as soon as it opens, it drops that initial pressure, it just starts to creep back up. So what I believe is happening, the reason I think it's dropping power, is I'm pretty sure it's just creeping wastegate to the point where it's the turbo's drawing so much air that the AFM is running out of resolution and the ECU doesn't know what it's doing anymore. At this point, it's dumping heaps of fuel in, which is also bad for wastegate control, as you can see, because obviously extra fuel means extra exhaust gas temperature, which is essentially what is the driving force behind driving the turbine. So dumping heaps of fuel in here is not helping with our boost, and we're sort of hitting up here around 16 pound. And as you can see there, where it hits that 16 pound, it really seems to be where this thing just runs out of flow, which is what we found with Zach's. That's why we had this dip here, and with no amount of duty cycle in the wastegate, we couldn't get that dip to start, you know, we couldn't get that to level out. So that's where it was running out of flow. So pretty much from what I can see here, what I can do is put the new ECU in it. With the new ECU in it, I'll at least be able to control fuel, and it will at least know what it's doing up around this boost area. And what I believe will happen is that on gate pressure like this, it's going to come on and then it's going to spike. But I believe, much like Zach's, we're going to find this. I think we're going to find that it's going to come spike and then sort of start to taper off. So it is something that we may be able to deal with. It's absolutely certainly not ideal to run a car that way. But if Angus is not wanting to go down the route of putting a better sort of turbo or something on this car, it may be what has to happen. So that's what I'm looking at the moment. So I'll have a chat to Angus. All right, so given that this is where we've got to with this car, and at this stage I don't want to continue without confirmation from Angus, I'm going to pull it up here, and I'll let you know what's going on, whether Angus is going to come get it and try and sort something out, or whether we're just going to do our best to tune it with what we've got, and he can bring it back at a later date. Alright guys, so I've had a chat to Angus just now. He's pretty happy for us to go ahead and pull this turbo back off, and we're just going to port that wastegate right out, like the same sort of size we did for Zach's. Try and get this as best we can under control with this setup before we go ahead and go along with the tune. So that's going to be first. We've got to get this wastegate sorted, get this under control before we go any further with it. So I'm going to let this thing cool down, and yeah, maybe later on this afternoon or in the morning I'll pull that hot side off and we'll look at what we can do with this turbo. So given that we now have to take the hot side off and actually pull the rear housing off the turbo off to port that gate port, I'm definitely going to go through and actually probably drill and tap a port onto the rear housing where we can actually utilize the EMAP port on this Adaptronic ECU and log some stuff. It'll be a really good insight for not only this car but for Zach's as well, to be able to do that, being that Zach's car doesn't have the inbuilt capability to do that. So it'll be really good data to have for this turbo, seeing as it's, you know, the cheapest turbo on the market as far as a bolt-in solution for an RB25. If we have a data for you know, back pressure using this turbo and this manifold setup, it'll be really good for pretty much anyone on the internet that wants to know. We can sort of work out exactly what sort of boost pressure we can run that's going to work the best as far as being safe and yielding good results with good timing. So that's awesome. Anyway, split this rear housing. Alright, so here we have the housing. So here is a nice little before shot of what size the actual gate is, and you can see how small that hole is compared to like actually how big the flap is. So that's the hole, that's the flap. So pretty much that hole all the way out to that outer ring almost can get taken out, and then you can actually port it a bit smoother inside so that it has a bit more priority flow, which is what we did for Zach's. So I'll get onto that. It is a very slow process with the die grinder. It takes a long time and it's loud and annoying, but evidently it's what we got to do. Alright, and that there is the after. See how much bigger that is? Much bigger than when we started, so should help us out a lot. Should help a great deal. Alright guys, what's up? We're back this morning. I had a long hard think about this last night, about what I'm going to do. I definitely do want to log the back pressure of this thing. I really want to find out just how restrictive these turbos are. But what I was thinking was, even though the Adaptronic has the port and an extra sensor for EMAP, the fact is the end user, the customer, really isn't going to get a lot of use out of it. You know, it's not going to really bother him. Once it's tuned and it's set, you know, there's no point in leaving it there. Now the issue is that being exhaust, you get a lot of contaminants and other stuff. It has the potential to damage the sensor. So what most people do is they use like a canister. It's almost like a baffle, which sort of filters out a lot of those contaminants and crap so that they don't make their way into the sensor and ruin it. And pretty much what I decided is, instead of buying one of these canisters for a couple $100 or $100, whatever they want, and having to wait for it to get here, I'm going to make my own canister, similar way to that I make a baffle for a catch can. I'm going to set this up so that we can do back pressure logs and stuff, not only on Angus's car, but also we will have this set up for the dyno for future, for if we want to do it with the dyno. So something that we probably should have done a long time ago, something that we will get a lot of use out of. So going to go through the effort and make a canister and make a setup for ourselves. So the plan is to use it for Angus's car, but only for the tune, and pretty much take it off and plug it up for when we give it back to Angus, because in reality it's not going to affect him anyway, whether it's there or not for the rest of the car. It's really only a tuning tool. So that is the plan. So we'll drill and tap this housing and we'll make this canister. The idea of doing it this way obviously being that it's not always hooked up to the port on the ECU, which means it doesn't have the potential always to be potentially damaging that sensor. So the ECU still has the port, the housing's still going to have the port, so if there's ever an issue in future and he needs it to fault find, or we need to do something to fault find, it's always going to be there to hook back up. But without having it hooked up all the time, there's no potential for it to do any damage. So that's the idea behind this, and that's why I'm happy to just make my own canister and use that. So yeah, we'll get into that today. Alright, we are drilled and tapped. There's plenty of meat on it, should be awesome. The old 1/8 MPT. Durka. Obviously it won't just be a nipple, that's just for illustrative purposes. And then once we're done, we just put a bung in it like so, and Bob's your Arnie. And there's just a port there for future use if anyone needs to use it. And we have some extra data in regards to these very cheap turbos. So we've got our steel wool really fine first. That is just to filter all of, you know, whatever carbon deposits or other contaminants you might have in your exhaust. And then the bigger stuff, this stuff here, is more of just like, I suppose, a final filter of making sure that this doesn't break down and go through. Almost like if I could have like a pipe filter, like a piece of gauze, that'd be perfect to put in the end, but I don't have any on me. So that would have been a really nice thing to add. But this should work out pretty well. I'm just going to engrave it so that you know which way the flow is. So anyway, I'm just going to polish these out with the flappy wheel on the die grinder there. And then we can pretty much test, make sure it's holding air properly and not leaking anywhere. And if it's not leaking, we can engrave it and paint it. And Bob's your Arnie, that's our little canister for EMAP, which would be a nice thing to have around. Anyway, it'll be, yeah, like I said, it's something we probably should have done a long time ago. It'll be nice to have this set up. Alright, we finally got the diff for the Mustang today. This is pretty much the last piece we've been waiting for that car. This is pretty much the last piece of the build. So this is, I won't even bother telling you, it's got nothing to do with this car, so we'll get out of that habit. But anyway, I'm excited about it because I really want that car finished. It's been here for so long, I'm so keen to have it done. Alright, so so now I'm just bunging up one end of this. I'm gonna do one end at a time. Gonna get the old soapy water out and do the old soapy water trick and just make sure there's no leaks, but I'm pretty confident there's not gonna be any. It's just making sure the welds aren't leaking. Alright guys, so how this setup is going to work is we come off the port on the housing. This is what I was talking about the copper tube kit. Now this is the one for our analog oil pressure gauge, which we often use for first startups of fresh engines. It's always good because these don't lie to you. You're not relying on any electrical component. It's if there's oil pressure, it'll tell you. So this is ideal. So we're not going to be using this one because it's our oil pressure one, but you can see that's just 1/8 MPT onto the copper line. Put that in there and tighten it up. And then what we're going to do is that'll just coil up heaps, and then it'll coil up, coil up, coil up. The whole length of it will just be coiled up into this canister, into this end. And the idea of all this tube is to try and wash off a lot of the heat that's going to be coming from there. So then by the time it goes through all them coils and then through this canister filter, off this end it should just be able to be a barb onto a line, and then that line will go to the sensor, wherever it may be, whether we're using the ECU in this situation or in future when we want to use the dyno. So there you have it guys, that's our new little canister for a filter that we can use. When we do use this for our dyno, because we've only got the one pressure sensor for the dyno, what we normally do is we'll do our tune with it on our intake side, and then once we're pretty happy with what's going on, we'll switch the pressure sensor over to the exhaust side. That way we can do a run logging the exhaust map or EMAP and then lay them over the top of each other, which gives you a really good indication of what sort of ratio you're working at as far as your pressure ratio over the head, the intake and the exhaust side. So the only thing I've got left to do is to paint this up. I'm going to go ahead and just paint it black, nice and simple. As you see, I've engraved it so I know which way it goes, and that's the idea, and very good. It's taken a long time, but like I said, we've been meaning to do this for ages. We should have done it a long time ago. Now it's done, it's going to be finally there. So I'm going to go tomorrow when I go to pick up the gaskets I need to refit this hot side for Angus. I'm going to go and get another one of them copper kits so that we can actually make the big coil setup, and this can just stay with the dyno, which is awesome. So guys, the whole theme of this episode, I've been talking a lot about back pressure and trying to combat it, but I haven't really sort of explained why it's a bad thing or what it leads to. So in a car where you're running a really restrictive hot side or a restrictive exhaust and you're running boost, trying to pump boost into that vehicle, what you're doing is creating obviously a backup of flow, which is creating a lot of pressure. Now when you're backing up these gases, you're not flowing properly across the head or through the cylinder. You're getting a lot of contamination in the cylinder, which is essentially gas that's already been burnt being drawn back into the cylinder or staying in the cylinder. You're not only that, is this gas is usually a lot hotter than the fresh air mixture that's coming in, so you end up with really high cylinder temperatures as well as really high spikes in cylinder pressure, and this is the perfect environment for knock to occur, and also pre-ignition, particularly in cars that run on alcohol-based fuels or blends that have a very low flash point. This is a very easy way to run into pre-ignition, which will kill any motor. It doesn't matter what I-beam rods or whatever you have in your motor, if you're pre-igniting or you've got pre-ignition, it's going to kill that motor very quickly. So characteristically what we find is you end up knock limited before you can get enough timing into your engine to reach maximum brake torque. So that's what we talk about when we say, the setup is knock limited. It means that there's not enough flow there on the exhaust side. We're getting knock before we're getting enough timing in that we know an engine would normally be happy with. So that's pretty much what the problem with high exhaust gas or high exhaust pressure is. Not only that, it's also not good to have that much pressure on the on the exhaust valves, particularly on things with stock springs and that. You can run into a lot of issues there. So that's a very simplified way for me to explain it, guys. Hopefully it sort of makes sense to the majority of you. So at the end of the day, if you don't have the flow, you're not going to make the power. If you can't flow the gases through your hot side, you can't flow the gases through your engine, you're not going to make the power. And like I said, we're not going to be able to get the timing into the car that it should be able to get into it. So they always end up down on power. Not to mention there's a bit of a safety risk involved. It's not a good way to run your engine is what I'm trying to get at. It's important to try and size your hot side as best as you can. One day I might probably do a series on how to actually correctly read compressor and turbine maps and stuff so that you know how to correctly size a turbo, but we'll get there one day.
get time to do that sort of thing. Anyway guys, I know I don't always do the best job of trying to explain things in a super simple way that the majority of people can understand, so I'm doing my best to try and make sure I thoroughly explain what we're trying to do. So the idea of this whole exercise is so that we can measure the difference between the intake and exhaust side. Ideally, in an engine like this, you want to see, well, ideally in any engine, ideally, is you want to see a 1-to-1 ratio. If you've got the same intake as exhaust pressure and they're equalized, what you essentially have is an engine that's operating in sort of equilibrium almost, where it's characteristically the same as if it was naturally aspirated almost. So you're not getting a backup of pressure anywhere. The engine's running as it should be, as if it was aspirated. Now I guess coming from a lot of single cam engines like RBs and LSs, this is all very, very important information, because the idea of having a cam that works correctly, you're relying on this. With twin cam engines, particularly ones that have VVT or VCT, you can sort of get away with a lot more, being able to change your cam angles and stuff like that, or your lobe separation for your cams individually. But with a single cam setup, if you've got a cam, you've got a lot of overlap and stuff, you really need to try and get this sort of down pat. So it all plays into each other. It's all part of correctly sizing your entire combo to make sure your engine works together and everything's happy. Yeah, like I said, hopefully one day I'll be able to do a bit more of a in-depth explanation on this sort of thing, so a lot of yous know what I'm talking about. Anyway, that's all. I'm going to paint this thing and get it done. Thank you for watching as always. Tune in for the next one where hopefully we're getting this back together. We'll see what difference our gate porting has made first, and then as long as we've got boost under control somewhat, we'll go ahead and fit our new ECU and our new injectors and get a tune on this thing as best we can, and hopefully we can make a little bit of power, and we'll see what we can do. Not only that, we'll get some freaking data on how these turbos go as far as flow and see what sort of back pressure we're going to be making. So thanks for watching. As always, hope you've enjoyed. Peace out. See you, bye.